Gonna get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Unafraid webinar panel discussion. And thank you so much for tuning in on this Tuesday evening. My name is Rebecca Cole, and I serve as the Director of Organizing for the Board of Church and Society. I'd like to open tonight recognizing that a lot is happening on immigration right now, including the latest news from this evening. The administration is halting immigration to the US, and they announced further exclusions for DACA recipients and undocumented people related to COVID-19 relief. With a horrific situation that changes rapidly, I am so grateful for this space tonight where we can gather, learn, process, and build with each other toward being a people that live our faith and take prophetic actions for a society, country, and a world where love and justice rule. Joining us tonight, we have a panel of exceptional leaders who bring important narratives and expertise to our conversation about the Unafraid documentary and DACA and our ongoing immigrant justice work. In the next hour, we will do a brief introduction of the panel and facilitation team. The panelists will share their impressions of the Unafraid documentary, and then we'll proceed with additional questions for the panelists regarding the current realities facing DACA recipients and their families, how congregations can be in solidarity with the DACA community, and take action so that we as a country invest in permanent and healing solutions for DACA recipients and their families. The webinar platform, like I mentioned earlier, allows each of you to also ask questions during our conversation. Please type your questions and comments in the question and answer box that is on the bottom of your Zoom screen in the bottom column. And we will address the questions at the appropriate time. So again, type your questions in the question and answer box or comments that you would like to discuss, and we will be addressing them later on in the webinar. Now I want to invite my colleague, the Reverend Jeannie Moore, and the panelists to introduce themselves. Jeannie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that introduction, Rebecca. As Rebecca mentioned, my name is Jeannie Moore, and I serve as Director of Civil and Human Rights here at Church and Society. Diana, Joella, Mamadou, and Reverend Reyes Rodriguez, can you introduce yourselves in that order? So Diana.
Oh no, I think I was just talking to myself. I thought I muted. I'm sorry. My name is Diana Puego. I'm with the National Immigration Law Center, and I do a lot of work around DACA with our legal and advocacy teams, and I'm also a DACA recipient. Thank you for having me.
Hey everyone, my name is Mamadou Jakite. I'm a DACA recipient from Atlanta, Georgia. I was originally born in a country called Mali, West Africa. I'm currently a third-year agronomy student at Delaware State University.
Hi everyone, my name is Joella Roberts. I'm a graduating senior at the University of the District of Columbia, DACA recipient from Trinidad and Tobago, currently working with Ford as the university program coordinator. I do a lot of work with United We Dream, UndocuBlack Network, and a lot of different organizations working towards social and political betterment for migrants.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Carlos Reyes Rodriguez. I am in Dover, Delaware, and I serve as a commission deacon in the Peninsula Delaware Conference as coordinator of Hispanic Latino ministries, and I am also a missionary from GBGM. I have the pleasure of being working and learning from a group of dreamers from Delaware State University since 3 years ago here in Delaware.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Rebecca.
Thank you. So we hope that everyone enjoyed watching this powerful documentary. If you didn't get to watch it yet, The Unafraid is a feature-length documentary that follows the personal lives of 3 DACA students in Georgia, a state that has banned them from attending their top state universities and disqualifies them from receiving in-state tuition at any other public college. Shot in an observational style over a period of 4 years, the film takes an intimate look at the lives of Alejandro, Silvia, and Aldo as they navigate activism, pursuing their right to education, and fighting for the rights of their families and communities. The link that we sent all of you is available and will be available for the next 10 days. So if you have not been able to watch the film yet, or need to finish parts of it, or want to watch it again, that link should be available to you for the next 10 days. Last fall, Church and Society hosted a screening of the film and panel discussion as part of the larger advocacy actions in support of Dreamers. Tonight, we are hosting this virtual screening and discussion to learn from these prophetic leaders at a critical time when DACA recipients and their families are in a particularly vulnerable situation. So to start off, to our panelists, can each of you please share a few words on what you thought about the film, and if the film resonates with your personal experience or the experiences you know of? And we can go in the same order.
All right, so I guess I'll kick us off. For me, I think the film, it wasn't just about any one issue. I actually was definitely noticed that it touched on a lot of issues that touch our families, and I thought that's really important to showcase that, you know, there's no one issue that affects us as individuals or as a community. There were people affected by, you know, access to healthcare and other just like life things that happen to us, and just really showing people that there's no way to predict how life can happen to us, and that we really all face the same challenges and obstacles, but obviously undocumented immigrants face a few more that make it particularly challenging to try to make your way out of difficult economic situations. And for me personally, I definitely resonated with me a lot. I actually lived in Georgia for a little bit before DACA, and I ended up going to college in South Carolina, where we also have a lot of bars against undocumented students going to public colleges and universities. And so the battle that I saw a lot of people in the film facing, I think that was definitely near and dear to my heart, and it definitely brought back a lot of memories of the uphill challenges and the injustice of just really trying to seek your education. And then also for me, you know, just seeing how painful it was to see that a lot of things, just again, like I said, life happens, and it got in the way of some people really being able to ultimately get that education that they so deserved. And me being on the side where I was ultimately, I think, frankly, by the grace of God, allowed to go on to college and get my education, seeing how much that changed my life and my family's life. It just felt deeply personal, and, you know, obviously encouraging to continue doing this kind of work, and grateful for those of you all who are bringing this to people's attention, because it's really important, and because education really can change people's lives. And I hope that that is something that people really take to heart, and help us continue fighting these battles, not just at the national level, but also at the state level, where it can make a really big impact in people's lives.
Thank you. Mamadou?
All right, for me, it really resonated being a Georgia native. a lot of scenes that I've seen in the film really resonated with me because you're at a critical point where you're 18 and you're becoming an adult. And the limitations that your undocumented status puts you under become very real. But you grew up in this country, and much of your identity is owed to this country. So you have a piece of freedom of speech that that you're taught of, and you're encouraged to use. So we go through and we do advocacy just to use our freedom of speech and tell people about our cause, and to show that yes, we are our special case, and we are truly American. It shows a portrayal that what goes on the family side as well. For me, my family did not know what I was going through, the burden I was going through, and that my undocumented status brought me, because most of them are U.S. citizens. So it made them align themselves. We watched it together the other day, and it really brought a perspective into their life about me where I couldn't really tell them through my own experiences. So they really got to see it through the film. Also, to touch on the advocacy part, I was an advocate too for immigration rights, and I noticed that what you guys were doing, the church has been very instrumental in helping us. Who was at the forefront of these things? There were reverends. They risked being arrested just to protect us and fight for our rights. So I really thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to speak here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And Joella.
Yes, I just want to echo a lot of what the panelists have already stated, that education is oftentimes a lever for economic growth. And so as migrants, I'm seeing, like specifically for me, seeing my family struggle and living in a mixed status household, like a couple of the people in the film, a lot of things resonate deeply with me. I also have to acknowledge that I don't live in a city where undocumented students are not allowed or not eligible to go to be in higher ed, and we are qualified as residents, right? So acknowledging my privilege in living in the city and where I live, which is Washington, D.C., but also addressing that I don't completely align in terms of race, right? So we didn't see anyone other than Latinx people in the documentary, and that says a lot, because a lot of ways that specifically Black people interface with the criminal justice system, even education, is very different. And so that is important to acknowledge, that the faces that represent these issues, even in education, in film, et cetera, have to be a little bit more diverse. But everything, it's like living proof of what we go through day in and day out. So it wasn't a surprise, shocking, or tearjerker, unfortunately, for a lot of us, because we're kind of forced into that realm of advocacy because it's our life. So to change our own settings and what we're going through, it's like we have to fight for ourselves, essentially. And we have to be like lawyers and understand legal terminologies. Few things are dropped, you know? So there's a lot, and because we don't live single issued lives, there's a lot of alignment. And I love the fact that the film showed the issue of family, of health, and all of these other things, that it's not just about school. We're humans really trying to exist like everyone else.
Excellent, thank you. And Reverend Carlos?
Yes, yeah, I think that the life that we were able to see of Alejandro, Silvia, and Aldo came very, very clear to me as I have been able to interact and learn from 150 students, Dreamer students from Delaware State University. These are students who are not from Delaware. They are all coming from Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, precisely those states where they are blocked. And Brother Mamadou is one of them, who have overcome so many difficult situations and the documentary shows not only their resilience, right, their faith and their strength to overcome the situations, but also brings to the surface the scene and the scene that we have rooted in our community, in our society, in our churches too, portraying and perpetuating a narrative that make our migrant communities evil, make our migrant communities criminals, right? These narratives that that we just kind of say it or not even challenge. So I noticed that the students that we had before today, Joella, Mamadou, and Diana, as well as the ones that we saw in the commentary, these are lives that they don't stay and sit down and wait for things to happen, but they actually are experts of not only the legal process, but also the advocacy process in order for them and their parents and their families being redeemed of the structure that we are part of. So as I am watching the documentary for third time this occasion, I am reminded of all these 150 DACA recipients who I have very close and at Wesley United Methodist Church, as the local church that is closest to their school, have been able to witness this testimony very closely.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Jean-Marie.
Diana, Mamadou, Joella, and Carlos, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your personal experiences. As Rebecca acknowledged earlier, this is an extraordinarily difficult time with the situation changing daily for DACA recipients, for immigrants, and we truly appreciate the time that you've taken to engage with us right now. And so on that note, I want to shift the conversation to DACA now. If you've seen the headlines this evening, in addition to suspending immigration to the United States tonight, the Trump administration also restricted student aid during COVID, during this pandemic. Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos announced this evening that the $6 billion of COVID-19 emergency college student aid is restricted and only for students who are eligible for federal financial aid. That is a group that includes only US citizens and some legal permanent residents. So undocumented college students, including DACA students, are prohibited from receiving emergency federal cash assistance for expenses like food, childcare, and housing. So these COVID funding exclusions announced tonight are just the latest attack, really the continuation of what we saw in this documentary, the attack on DACA recipients, the Dreamer community, and their families. So looking back, kind of giving a brief historical overview, at the conclusion of the Unafraid documentary, right, President Trump was elected in November 2016 on an anti-immigrant agenda, and we saw in the documentary how Alejandro, Sylvia, Aldo, and many others were gearing up for a long-haul fight for immigrant justice. Less than a year after the conclusion of the film, in September 2017, the Trump administration announced that it was ending DACA and giving Congress 6 months to come up with a legislative solution to protect the approximately 800,000 DACA recipients from deportation. Congress did not meet the March 2018 deadline. However, numerous court challenges have stymied the administration's attempt to end DACA. And so that brings us to today. We are awaiting a Supreme Court decision on DACA currently, which is expected to come really any day between now and June. As we all are aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has also taken over society in ways that I don't think any of us could have anticipated. And specifically for the approximately 800,000 DACA recipients, their millions of family members and other immigrants, COVID has put this community in a very precarious position, even more precarious than they were already in. Prior to COVID, many immigrants, both documented and undocumented, were already excluded from accessing governmental healthcare and financial support programs. These exclusions are maintained currently in the pandemic relief packages that are being passed. So right now, many immigrants are barred from receiving the aid coming out to weather the storm. In addition, immigration arrests and deportations are continuing. Yet, even in this situation, many immigrants continue to serve as the societal glue holding the United States together right now. Millions of immigrants work in the education, healthcare, policy, religious, agricultural, caregiving, and other industries that are keeping the public functioning, fed, safe, and alive. Nearly 30,000 DACA recipients are essential frontline workers in healthcare alone. So we're going to talk tonight about what it means to be a DACA recipient right now and how others can be allies during this time of great exposure, vulnerability, and fear. And in the face of these mounting challenges, I want to just remind us something that I was reminded of watching the documentary yesterday. One DACA recipient in the Unafraid film says at the very end, it's during a protest, I think after or during the 2016 election, there are protests that are featured in the film, and one of the speakers at a protest is a DACA recipient who says to the crowd, you know, what happens when President Trump ends DACA? And he says in response, I will be undocumented, unafraid, and unapologetic. And I think for me, just hearing those words yesterday gave me strength and guidance during this time. The realities are, as we know, extraordinarily great, but as that protester reminded us, our spirit is greater. And so on that note, I'd like to ask Diana Pliego our first question. Diana, as an expert at NILC, at the National Immigration Law Center, can you share a bit of context and some of the possible outcomes regarding the Supreme Court decision right now with DACA? How is the National Immigration Law Center responding?
Yes, happy to. So as you mentioned, we are currently waiting on a decision from the Supreme Court. Supreme Court heard oral arguments in the case on November 12th of last year, and all we're doing now is waiting to see how they respond. We're monitoring the cases, the potential decision days every day. This week we had a potential decision day yesterday on Monday, and we have another one coming up on Thursday. So we could hear as early as Thursday of this week. And so what we're waiting to hear back from the Supreme Court is really their decision on answering two basic questions before them. And then that leads us to essentially three potential outcomes. And so I'll walk us through what those are. So what the court is really trying to answer is, one, can the court even look at this case? Can it intervene in this decision that the administration made? That's the reviewability aspect. The other question it's trying to answer is the way that the administration ended the program, was it lawful or not? We're claiming that it was arbitrary and capricious, that it actually was not a lawful way to terminate the program. And so that actually is just three potential outcomes. It's not very black and white as far as like a win is a solid win and a loss is a solid loss. There's some outcomes that have some good and some bad. And so I'll start with the best case scenario. The best case scenario would be for the court to determine that it can review the decision made by the Trump administration and that the way that they ended the program was unlawful. That's the best case scenario for us. They're affirming that they can intervene in the decision and that the way that the administration decided to end it was unlawful, and therefore the administration would have to go back, and if they wanted to end it, they'd have to provide better reasoning and do it in a better way, which we would of course continue to challenge, right? And then another potential outcome is that the court can decide that they actually can't intervene at all. They can't review the decision. So obviously under this scenario, the termination of the program would stand. However, the potential good here is that it does leave a little bit of room open for future administrations to do similar executive action. So it would be a loss now, but in the future, there's still potential, right? And then the third, I think more in the worst case scenario realm, is the court determining that it can review the decision and then determining that the way that they ended the program was actually lawful. Obviously, this would terminate the program, and then we would have to see what the administration does to officially wind it down or end it. I do think it's important to note, though, is that we are in this worst case scenario, and we know that the program is coming to an end, it won't necessarily mean that on that day that there's a decision that people's work permits or protection from deportation is automatically invalid. We will have to ultimately wait and see how the court writes its decision, and then how USCIS issues the guidance for how they're going to do this, right? So we'd have to see how the administration truly decides to take that step if they get that potential win for them in the court. And so to answer your question about what we're doing at NILC is obviously we're continuing to monitor the case, put out information around this, advocating in Congress for other ways that we could extend protections for people. And obviously, you know, if you follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, the moment that we know that a decision is out and once we determine which scenario we're in, we'll be putting out explainer information. And one thing we definitely ask of people is to really help us to kind of uplift accurate information. And, you know, sometimes the media can kind of take one thing and run with it, but it may be a little bit misleading and instilling fear in people that may not be necessary. So encourage people to do that. And then just one more thing that we wanted to flag that was a recent thing that we did was we did file a motion in our case before the Supreme Court, essentially bringing to light the COVID-19 conversation that is happening and just making a case to the court that this pandemic further highlights how much the administration truly didn't take into account our dependence on the program, not just like as individuals, but also the country, acknowledging all of those people who are working on the front lines, not just in the healthcare industry, but just as essential workers all around who have DACA. And so the last thing we need is this further uncertainty. And so that was something that has been brought before the court, and they have accepted that additional brief, and we'll just have to see how they respond to that in their decision.
Thanks so much, Diana. Just to reiterate something Diana mentioned, NILC, the National Immigration Law Center, is a very reliable resource and one that I encourage everyone to keep tabs on and follow up with during this time and in the future. Mamadou, in this complex time, can you share what it's like to be a student right now?
All right, thank you for that question. I think I can answer that question by saying, although I always remain in faith and high hopes that a piece of legislation will pass to help us dreamers, there's always a looming sense of uncertainty because given that in recent time, our president has called for the stoppage of the DACA program. For me and for many other dreamers, this would be devastating because education is something we cherish dearly. And growing up in the United States, my parents will always tell me that your pursuit in God and combined with your pursuit in academia is the most guaranteed way to climb the social ladder in this country. And thoughts of my time as a student in the United States ending brings a lot of anxiety because I truly believe that I'm adding value to this country in the future as an agronomist, as an educator, and someone who promotes environmental sustainability. Our work in social justice and advocacy has given me a renewed sense of direction in life and also renewed my faith. I'm able to now comfortably come out of the shadows and dispel many of the narratives and rumors that paint the story of the dreamer in a bad light. Because whether most would like to accept it or not, the story of the dreamer is a very American issue. It is a homegrown issue, and the things that are happening in Washington and the things that are portraying themselves on the news are writing themselves in American history. You have a group of people who owe much of their identity, if not most of their identity, to this nation. So we are products of America, and it's important for the American people to understand that. I think it would be a total waste of an investment of the United States if they don't take advantage of a group of people who are for the most part good people who are trying to pursue education and want to contribute to this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mamadou. Joella, you mentioned earlier the racial dynamics of the film and your experience in education and other spaces. Would you be able to share a bit more about your experience as a student? You are a graduating senior, congratulations, this semester at the University of the District of Columbia, where unfortunately graduation has been postponed due to COVID-19. and you're also University Program Coordinator with Forward.us. So you are an advocate, you're a student, and you bring a very particular experience to this issue that we're talking about right now.
Thank you. I do, excuse me, want to highlight that I did talk about the privileges of being accepted to a university as under residency rate, and they do accept undocumented students. However, a big issue for students is how to pay for school, right? And being an undocumented student, we are not eligible for a lot of federal aid, a lot of scholarships because they require residency and so one of the things, well, during my stay at the university, I helped co-found an organization by the name of Migration Matters. And it's the first organization at a HBCU to center undocumented students. And one of our main goals is to establish our own internal scholarship to help students pay for school, for books, for anything or any assistance that they need. But I think that it's very important to also shift and share responsibility. As immigrants, it's very hard for us to ask. We say thank you more than we ask for help. So I really had a huge ask for our university is to be more intentional about how they allocate funding. And though being a public institution and a lot of our policies and monies are delegated by the mayor, being intentional about helping those students that we assist, right? So that being said, speaking on the race topic, it's very important to highlight, even in where I'm from, Washington, DC, we have the largest incarceration rate in the nation, and we're not even a state. 97% of those people are Black. So it's crazy that I have not interfaced with our legal system being a Black woman, right? So being able to even make it to college and not be, and continue to be a quote unquote good immigrant because I did not interact with our legal system is only because of the grace of God, because the way that our system is designed is that I wouldn't even be sitting in this position today. So when you have when you meet at the intersection of race and immigration status, we are often left in the shadows. And literally, I watched, my friend sent me a video of today of deportees being deported to Jamaica, and about 14 of them were confirmed COVID-19. And so they're fine with knocking on people's doors, deporting them because they're at home. If anything, there's a rampant and mass deportation happening with a lot of migrants. And unfortunately, Black migrants and Black and brown migrants in particular are not being highlighted because we're not the typical face of migration. So I think it's a really hard conversation to have as living in both of my identities as a Black person with Black people on migration, and then as an immigrant, speaking on the racial disparities present in the immigrant space. And because I organize with a lot of organizations such as Unidos US, United We Dream, there's been a lot of battles, honestly, of addressing anti-Blackness in the immigration movement. But I'm not going to stop organizing with my Black and brown and API and all those other identities that are representative, because we all, whether we agree with it or not, have backgrounds and people in our family that are migrants. So thank you for asking.
Thank you so much, Joella. And that is a touchy issue and one that is difficult to explicate, but you just explained it beautifully. And I think everyone on the call would agree that your leadership, your experience, and Mamadou's as well, in very different ways, you too are both forging as students, as DACA recipients, forging the way and demonstrating what this country has in the gift that DACA recipients and DACA students and immigrants broadly, what we have as a community in you. So thank you for that. Okay, Carlos, as a faith leader in Delaware, how has your ministry connected with DACA students and their families? What are you and your team doing, and what can other congregations do to support DACA recipients in their communities at this time?
Yeah, almost 3 years ago, I had the chance to know the second cohort, first and second cohort of Dreamers from Delaware State University. They were back in the time around 60, 67 students. And the first thing that we explored through the community of faith is to respond as one of the 4 pillars that the church has been able to respond throughout this crisis, right? And it's the right to belong and be welcome. And we offer this space at the fellowship hall in the Wesleyan Adventist Church for students to manifest any type of gathering expression. And we were based on this particular verse of Matthew 9, verse 35, which actually also shows up on Matthew chapter 4. And we see there that Jesus went, meaning that Jesus walked through the villages, teaching their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness. And I think that throughout the different gathering expressions that Dreamers choose to do, I think that they are doing that precisely. They are going to the different temples, the different churches in our conference, the different synagogues, and they are proclaiming that they are in fact children of God. And they are curing us, the church and society, from the sickness of xenophobic sentiments and racism and discrimination. Every time that they encounter or they are part of sharing their stories or telling their stories, they are bringing that balm of hope and resistance that we so badly need. So this started as a expression of La Caminante, a community that works, that is not precisely a church. And I want to be very clear with that. We are not a church per se. These students are not United Methodists neither. They do have a faith that has been brought up by their parents and their grandparents and the native people. But we have come together to share our story of migration, to both reclaim migration as part of our part and core of our faith, and at the same time reclaim justice as essence of God. So you will see in the picture on the left is a gathering that we had on Saturday nights where the students themselves prepare their special food, and then we have a salsa night or a game night. And then the picture on the right, you will see a space where we met also at the church called La Caminante on Tuesdays, where we came together and we relate the scripture to the journey of migrants, how we are all to act, to act in faith and in face of the circumstances that we are motivated to seek justice. And this is another manifestation, another gathering expression. We start participating on protests here in Dover, Delaware, and also in Wilmington, as well in Washington, D.C. Next, please. Here, we start a partnership with General Board of Church and Society, where students were exploring their faith more towards seeking justice in the different aspects of justice itself. Next. And that partnership further even more, next please, once we gathered to have an structured training where students were equipped with what we call the Wesleyan quadrilateral. What does scripture, tradition, reasoning, and experience say about migration? And these students were the first, the pilot course that they took, an intense course of this particular Wesleyan quadrilateral about immigration, and they decided to go to different churches and share their stories. A couple of pictures that are coming up will show you the journey that we took in Georgia. In 6 days, we visited 7 different churches. Is in a panel discussion where the students were sharing their stories, in addition to a theological frame that Rebecca Cole from General Board of Church and Society and myself were able to put together for people to understand and also to motivate them to act in steps towards advocacy. This is another place that we visit in Georgia. We cross the entire state and we visit both of the conference, northern, southern part of Georgia. This is one of the Hispanic Latino communities that we were able to visit. And here the panel discussion shifted from advocacy steps to glimpses of hope and change, because you will see a few of the DACA recipients who were able to go to school, but at the same time, you are gonna see in this picture people who did have DACA, but because they were in Georgia, they were not able to further their possibilities to go to higher education. So how we connect the students or the people who want to go to the academia with the experience that the students had already done or already have. So in general, what we are now trying to do is to make that person-to-person experience. Now we are trying to do it virtually. So from now on, GBCS and the coordination of Hispanic Latino ministry here in Peninsula Delaware are putting together a virtual story sharing that is available to the entire denomination or even beyond the denomination. We are bringing these students in this particular channel through Zoom or other online platform where the students can continue sharing their stories. And also we can provide tools or equip the congregants or constituents of different conferences for advocacy steps. Again, I do think that these students are the face of Jesus who are walking through different places in the United States to change us, to make us realize the realization of how far we are from being a faithful body, but also providing us with hope to become what we have been made, a body that is sacrificial, that serves and seeks justice and peace.
Thank you so much, Carlos. The ministry that you and the ministry that the DACA students that you work with who have been traveling and sharing their story and truly, like you said, living into Jesus's call and example is a tremendous blessing to communities in this country. A final question before we turn to Q&A, and this one is open to all of our panelists. How can faith communities be in solidarity with you, with Dreamers, and with your families? How can we be good allies? And I'll just note that we appreciated very much your words, each of you, about your own faith and your own sense of purpose being challenged, but also confirmed and affirmed during this time. So that question is open to any who would like to answer.
I'm happy to kick us off. So as I was thinking about this, I feel like it's really hard to answer this and not acknowledge the times that we're in. Obviously, we're waiting on a Supreme Court decision that has caused anxiety for a lot of people for a long time. But in addition to that, we're all also facing this collective impact of the pandemic. But I think one thing we've touched on is that, immigrants in particular are feeling the impacts of all of these things in very different ways. And so my thoughts are going to, we're obviously encouraging people to renew their DACA. But for those who don't know, that their DACA application costs $500 every 2 years. And for a lot of people out there, particularly those who might already be living paycheck to paycheck, like many people in this country, that can be a lot every 2 years. Add on top of that the fact that people are facing particular economic hardship right now during this pandemic, and that they might be having to renew extra early because of this upcoming Supreme Court decision. That can be a lot. And so I think I really would challenge people to start having conversations with friends, with their congregations, with their leadership about how they can support immigrants and DACA recipients in their church congregations or just their friends in general, because it really is a time where we need to come together as a community. And I extend that also to just kind of generally to encourage people to think about the fact that many immigrant families are being left out of the relief packages that are being passed by Congress right now. We're advocating for their inclusion, but that stimulus check that a lot of people are getting and that's, you know, helping in some way, a lot of undocumented families are just not gonna get that. They're just being left out. And so often there are times the ones that need it were the ones that need it the most, you know. And so it's extremely, I think, unjust. And I think it's something that I want to uplift with people to just be thinking creatively about how can we get creative during these particularly difficult times to really be there for our communities and be the church and be the community that we want to model for our government, right? Because I think at the end of the day, if you know, say that you stand with us as immigrant youth, as DACA recipients, then that to me means that you also stand with my parents, my family, my community members who might not have DACA, who are completely undocumented, and frankly, even with me, who might be completely undocumented if the DACA program comes to an end. So to just really think about the times that we're in, and really get creative. Pray about it. How does God want you to really be there for your neighbor, for your community right now?
Thanks, Diana.
Hi, this is Joella. I wrote down a few things while listening, completely echoing Diana's suggestions, but first and foremost, to pray. I am a woman of faith myself, and I definitely believe that God is going to carry us through no matter what decision will be made. The immigrant community has always been resilient. That's how we got DACA in the first place. So pray for us, please. Second is conversation. I believe that that's a very strong tool. Now that you're equipped with all of the information that we've shared, that the documentary shared, to me, it's now your duty to share that, right? And it's not a matter of like, oh, I heard a conversation about immigration. I challenge you to starting a conversation. Did you know that this is the new ruling on so-and-so? Did you know that there were originally 800,000, now there's less than 700,000 DACA recipients for whatever reason, right? 3 is community being engaged. A lot of protest and things that we do in solidarity, we can't participate in because in fear of being arrested or things like that. So if you are a legal citizen and you're willing to put your physical body on the line, please show up to the protest, show up to the rally, show up to anything that you can. 4th is to donate your stimulus check. A lot of people received a stimulus checks, and there are a lot of websites allowing you to donate your check to undocumented families and even DACA recipients to help them because, as you know, we were not eligible for one. And lastly, donation in general, whether that's $5, $20, you name it, pick an organization that works with directly impacted people and put your money where your mouth is, essentially, because even though we talk about dreamers being economic levers for our nation, we ourselves, even I myself, I'm taking care of 2 other undocumented people in my household and the only person with a social security number, right? So even though I'm able to work and make money, there's a lot of financial burden and a lot of things that we are not privileged to. So those are my few suggestions that you all can participate in.
Thank you so much, Joella. Those are great. And just so everyone knows, this webinar is being recorded and these suggestions will be captured in the notes, which we will send with the recording just briefly. And we're keeping an eye on the time. We see that it's 8:54. We are going to go past our 9 o'clock end time, but we won't go past 9:15. So if you can stay with us through then, please do. Thank you. Mamadou or Carlos, did you want to reply to the question?
I have something brief to say. I would like to say that the church has always played a big role in our movement, and I would like to thank everyone in the body of Christ for that. Right now, in these complex times, we are at your need again. So we humbly ask that please, when you hear anything that is related to dreamers or people who are under a temporary protected status, please open up your hearts and listen to and then just give a little. Like I said before, the church has always been a big part, whether it's from reverends standing at the forefront of protests, risking arrest just to ensure that we have rights here, or whether it's members of the congregation who give up money for books for students to acquire books for the semester, or providing housing for us during summer periods when we're far away from home and we don't have enough money to go home. I would just like to thank the body of Christ for that, because we all know that the immigration system needs fixing. Beginning at starting at the Dreamers will be a great start for us. Thank you.
Amen. And Carlos, do you have anything to add before we address some of the other questions that the group has had?
Yes, the rest of the panel had mentioned many of the things I had in mind, but I do think that the community of faith have a tremendous power. And I think that the word hospitality is no longer a matter of acceptance, especially with immigrants. I think has to go beyond that, and it's a matter of honoring and fostering the platforms of power that we possess, such as the pulpit, such as Bible studies, community organizing efforts, manifestations, protests, calling campaigns, writing letters, op-eds. All these things are elements of our faith, and without action, our faith is dead. These are the things that I think we as community of faith have to bring forward, especially when our faith is based so much in the movement from as nomads, as immigrants. We have to put that in front of people's hearts and people's faces to seek identity, the identity that God has given us, so we can dismantle all these structures that has just diminished the humanity of our migrant communities.
Excellent, thank you. I want to take some time to we can start the discussion and answer some of the questions that have come through. And one of the ways that we think about as we bring new people into this work and into the movement, we always want to remember that we don't always know the definitions of different terms, and definitions are really important. Like Diana had mentioned, it is very important to share authentic and truthful information. So I loved one of the questions from Janet Mills that brings us back to the basics, asking about what your definition of Dreamers and DACA is. So I'm wondering if one of the panelists could share, what does DACA actually mean, and what does it mean when we use the term Dreamers?
Can you hear me? So I can take a first stab at that. I think this was one of the things where the simple way is that I think all DACA recipients are Dreamers, and then not all Dreamers are DACA, because not everybody who falls under that term of Dreamers qualified for the program, because it did have certain specifications of age of when you arrive to the country, and other things with background checks, things like that. And so DACA recipients are really like a smaller pool of the larger pool of immigrant youth that most people refer to as Dreamers. And I think I will say, I think it's also, since we're having a conversation about terminology, Dreamers is something that is widely used by a lot of people, but there are some within the movement who are Dreamers who sometimes are opposed to that term, actually, because of a simple reason that it kind of, I think in a big picture, oftentimes will paint me as somehow maybe potentially more deserving than someone like, say, my parents. And I, for one, always like to say, well, if you like me, if you support me, if somehow you are inspired by me or anyone like me, then you really do, ultimately, you should be inspired and support the original Dreamers, which were my parents. And so I want to just add that little bit. I know that wasn't technically part of the question, but you might also hear people who choose to not use that, and they might use a broader term like immigrant youth to really include as many people as possible. And I think that's one of the things of the immigration movement, is we're really trying to be as inclusive as possible. So there's a lot of different terminology. So that's a really great question.
Thank you. And can you elaborate on specifically the DACA status? For those of you that have DACA status, what does that mean? What does it allow you access to that other undocumented people or undocumented young people don't have access to?
Yeah, I can also kick off that conversation and welcome anyone else who wants to add. So at the very basic core, DACA provides two things. One is protection from deportation. So technically it stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And so that just means that like legally any kind of deportation activity for you is deferred. And so while you are granted DACA, unless you commit some sort of major crime, essentially, you are protected. So if I were to get pulled over by the cops for maybe speeding or something, I wouldn't have as much fear as someone who wasn't documented that would actually lead to deportation. The other really key part of this that you've heard of is a work permit. So with DACA, we were given a social security number and work authorization, and it comes in those 2-year increments. And so that's the really key part that a lot of people I think are focusing on, but I think equally important is also the protection from deportation, obviously. But essentially with that, we're able to, pass e-verify processes and go and just apply for a job like everyone else.
Yes, this is
and
true.
I want to add more to that. There's a lot that comes.
Yeah, I wanted to invite Joella to add to that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you. I also, all of those are true, as well as because of the fact that we are eligible for a social security number, we are able to do things such as get a license, a driver's license. We are able to get a credit card. We're able to take out loans. So I was able to get a car and a car note and things like that, right? And oftentimes when we talk about DACA recipients, we say immigrant youth, and they were brought here as kids. But the oldest DACA recipient may be around like late 30s as of right now, based on the regulations of the program and when it was instated. So remembering that these are predominantly adults, because the program was ended in 2017, there is no one under 18 that is a DACA recipient. So adding that humanistic approach and element, understanding that these are adults, working adults, trying to get a car, trying to drive, regular things that people who are citizens might take for granted are things that we were able to obtain. So I also want to echo something that Mamadou said, is the fact that it's not just about work permits and things like that. It's literally the fact that most of your identity was created in the United States. So imagine in the forthcoming months, you may be deported from home, because we say home is here, right? Deported from a place that you grew up, that you're well acquainted for, that your friends, your family, your church members are present. So it's a lot more actually for DACA recipients than just freedom from deportation and work authorization, because there are so many layers under that.
Yes, thank you so much. And I wanted to just look at another couple of questions have to do with the different states that prohibit DACA recipients from attending college. And I just wanted to see if any of you, I know that there are several states that have very strict laws, and others that there was another question about certain states being more accommodating. And so I'm just wondering, I see Joella, you're shaking your head. So maybe you can share a little bit about that, and if others want to add, that would be great.
Absolutely. So working in the university program at Forward, now I'm well acquainted with a lot of information regarding higher ed and undocumented people. Acknowledging the fact that only 13 of the 50 states allow DACA recipients or undocumented people to get in-state tuition. So a lot of my comrades even are charged as international students when they're trying to acquire education. And that sometimes may be 4 times, 3 times, 5 times the rate of residents. So I'm taking that into consideration, that people who are not able to work are also charged as international students trying to access higher ed. So a lot of advocacy, this is actually honestly a state issue. DC is not a state, but we do have in-state tuition. So taking precedent from the nation's capital, you can advocate for your state to allow undocumented students to receive in-state tuition. And a lot of times it's also by university. So the university can decide whether private or public, whether they would allow undocumented students to be permitted and at what rate, and how much financial aid they will allow undocumented students. So sometimes it's smarter for undocumented students to go to a private university that might be more expensive because of the fact that they might receive more financial aid when seeking higher ed.
Yeah, and I can add just like a little bit more, but all of that is so very true. We do on our website at NEL. I can include this link in the notes that will be sent out. We do have a little like kind of map that shows you which states have which kinds of laws. So if you're curious about your state, to do that kind of advocacy that Joella was just talking about. But I do want to flag the 3 states that do like outright ban people. So obviously in the film we saw that Georgia, some schools ban students from undocumented students from attending. There are 2 other states, so there's Alabama and South Carolina. And South Carolina is where I ended up going to school, where their public colleges and universities explicitly ban undocumented students. And so that's another thing that actually comes from DACA. Because of DACA, I have a brother who's now able to go to community college there. And he's literally right now, because of the pandemic, my biggest worry for him is that he might not get to graduate on time. He had it very planned out before his DACA expires next year. And so just to like showcase another way where like all of these current events, DACA and all of these other issues like really are intertwined and very complex in people's lives.
But I did want to also, thank you for adding that. I also wanted to add the good that universities are participating in. There are universities such as Fresno who have entire dream centers allocated to the support of DACA recipients. So the universities are taking part in being socially responsible as well as academically responsible for their students. So really investing in those and picking those universities if you know people who are undocumented that have those kind of supports, because they do exist.
Yes, and I just want to mention too, exactly what Joella said. There are many universities that have specific programs for DACA recipients and for undocumented students who do not have DACA. And one of our United Methodist elders in the California Pacific Conference leads a ministry with UCLA through the Wesley Foundation. And we recently did an interview with one of their students. You can find it on our website, who is an undocumented student that does not have DACA. And we were able to hear a little bit about her experience, but I know that places like the Wesley Foundation at UCLA and several other universities, there are not only support from the university, but a lot of that support has actually come from students organizing to change the systems and the structures internally at their universities. And so I know some of the programs that UCLA has is because of a long history of undocumented students organizing with the community to actually change the institution's policies around offering education and financial assistance and everything. So we're just really proud of all that organizing work that is happening across the universities. And we can send out some of these resources to you about more details about each of the states. There's been a lot of questions in the list on that. I also want to just address quickly, there are a lot of questions in the list around funding and whether or not the United Methodist Church has a denominational streamlined fund for this. I know that a lot of local churches and annual conferences have been providing resources and donations and funding in a lot of different ways. But we will bring the suggestion to our United Methodist Immigration Task Force that does function across the denomination and with all of the agencies so that we can think about that. For right now, like someone mentioned earlier, there are a lot of ways that you can donate your stimulus check, that you can donate to DACA renewals, because in this time that we're awaiting the Supreme Court decision, DACA renewals are still happening and those costs and fees have increased for students. So that's a big burden. And then also there are many different funds through a lot of local churches and local organizations, coalitions that we can share with you on where to donate until we may have a larger denominational structure to do that. Okay, let's see. There's been a couple of questions about, one question came very early on about what was the panelists' experience of other students relating to DACA students on your campuses and in your communities. So I just wanted to see if any of the panelists wanted to answer that.
Oh, I will take a shot at it.
Thank
me,
you.
No problem, no problem. I attend HBCU, which is a historically Black college, university. Growing up in the United States, when people looked at me, they would not assume that, okay, I'm from Africa, I'm not from Rasta. I grew up as a typical American. I lived out the African-American identity. So my special place at this HBCU allows me to open up and share with the Black diaspora that, hey, there are, I try to demystify the U.S.-Mexico border. When you hear the word undocumented, you immediately think about somebody who comes from south of the border. But what most people don't understand that is that we make up a multicultural group. We come in many ethnicities and shapes and colors. So it allows me to both stand in solidarity with my Latinx community, but also live up to certain legacies that Black freedom fighters in the 1960s who fought for the equal right for education. You know, it allows me to live up to their legacy as well. But my campus is welcoming and is open. People are down with the cause. They're mostly shocked and surprised that, okay, there are Black undocumented people. So it allows me to, engage the people a little bit more, and spread an advocacy. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Mo. And I wanted to share an interesting question. Mo, you brought up the difference of people's perceptions and some of the racial pieces for this. And I received a question through text message of one of our leaders in Central Texas who had called in but was not on the computer, so couldn't type in a question. But she is African American and she comes from a Black church. And so she asked specifically, can we ask how the African Americans can be most helpful? I believe we have more in common than many believe in and outside the church. I just wanted to pose that question.
Okay, yeah. How can African Americans be more helpful? In my experience, being from the South, being from Atlanta, Georgia, African Americans have been receptive and open. Again, I'm at a HBCU. You're more met with shock than anything else when I tell them my story. And they're more open to help me and allow dreamers to hear the plight of the dreamer, because the plight of the dreamer is very similar to how African Americans were integrated into society after 1865, which is a period in Reconstruction. It's a period where you were trying to take a group of people and try to see how can we fit them into the society. And that's what we're doing right now. We're becoming an indispensable part of this nation, where we're becoming teachers, we're doctors, we have skilled trades. Most of us are bilingual, if not trilingual. We're proving that we are valuable to this country. So how can African Americans help? I think they've been helping so far, in my opinion. I don't know how they can add more to it, but just listening and opening up your hearts.
Hi, this is Joella. I just wanted to add something that I think is very important, which is to yield your voting power. A lot of undocumented people cannot vote. And in these states where it's a majority Black, understanding what Blackness even means, because Kwame Ture, also known as Stokely Carmichael, was part of SNCC, and he was born in Trinidad and Tobago, right? From my knowledge, would have been a DACA recipient if people were to address migration and in Blackness. But then also he coined the whole term and understanding of Blackness in the United States. But somehow his relation to migration is erased. Intentionally, I don't know. But understanding what Black and African American and all of these identities, those people who might also consider themselves that and what they look like, and then also using all the privileges And though being a Black person in this nation can definitely be seen as a disprivilege, but even understanding that in marginalized groups, you still have privileges. And one of those is voting. So making sure that you're holding your officials accountable, your universities accountable, that there's equity on every part is definitely something that I will ask personally for that person to do.
Rebecca,
Thank you so much. Yes, go ahead, Jeannie Marie.
Thanks. Can I also just say a brief word about that question? And thank you, Mamadou and Joella, for those fantastic replies. As a Black African-American faith leader myself, I think it's really important for Black people of faith, Black people generally in this country, to be open and to really let go of the xenophobia that exists, if we're honest, in our own congregations and communities. One of the tactics of the current Trump administration is to divide and conquer. And there have been, from really day one of this administration, numerous policies that have been designed to pit African-American against immigrants. And again, ignoring that those communities overlap, and really that we are truly all connected. And so it is a tactic of racist policy to stir up xenophobia within Black communities, and we need to resist that. And as was said earlier, we need to not only listen to conversations for immigrant justice, we need to start them ourselves. And so clearly there are many Black faith leaders and community members who are doing just that. I just wanted to give that additional word of support. And we are going very much over time, but
yes.
Thank you for the wonderful questions. Yeah.
Yes, and we are going to move to the last piece, but I thank you all so much for these questions. And there's a piece in our ways to take action in the next part that will invite you to continue conversation with us and be connected with us through the United Methodist Rapid Response Teams Network that Church and Society coordinates and leads. And we have monthly calls. We gather monthly for updates. We hear updates from the field. We have a space for asking questions. And so I hope you all will consider being part of that work with us and be able to more frequently have these spaces where we can discuss and ask these really important questions. I want to make note that Jack Amick from UMCOR has put in the chat information about an UMCOR advance that was created recently for a COVID fund. And there are grants available to Methodist organizations, congregations that are assisting vulnerable people and communities. And that includes undocumented immigrants and their communities. So that is a great resource, especially when we were asking about funding earlier. So thank you so much, Jack, and for being on the call. Jack leads the migration work at UMCOR. Okay, we're gonna move lastly to this last couple slides. And I just want to thank the panelists, Joella, Mamadou, Diana, and Carlos, for your powerful words, for your testimonies, for your insight and your wisdom. We are so grateful for the gift that you've given us tonight. And so friends, after hearing these powerful testimonies of challenge, injustice, resilience, and hope, I want us to ask ourselves, how are we called to act in this moment? And tonight, we, Church and Society, and the panelists, we invite you to take action with us. And there are many actions to take, but we wanted to create something that was concrete and doable and something that you can do tomorrow. So we invite you, with the outcome of the Supreme Court decision being uncertain, and as we've heard earlier, the increased risk that DACA students and their families and the undocumented people that are not included in DACA, the risks that they face are increasing. We are asking each of you to join us tomorrow in contacting your senators on Wednesday and tell them that you are a United Methodist and you urge them to invest in permanent and healing solutions for DACA recipients and their families by passing a Clean Dream Act in the Senate. And with this ask, we want to communicate to the senators specifically because the House has already passed a legislation similar to this. And we want to communicate specifically with our senators that any proposal must support permanent relief for Dreamers without compromising the safety and the livelihood of their families, without pitting immigrant communities against each other, or pairing immigration relief for some populations with enforcement policies that endanger others. So that's a piece that's really important when we ask for a permanent solution and a pathway to citizenship, a legislation that would offer that. So we've included in a sample script in this slide, and we would love for you to make these calls tomorrow with us. If you don't know who your senators are or how to reach them, you can use the United States Capitol switchboard phone number that is on the screen. And lastly, if you are interested in continuing this conversation, in joining us in this movement for immigrant justice, please email Jeannie and I for more information about the United Methodist Rapid Response Team Network. And like I mentioned, we meet monthly, we send regular updates, policy updates, and different updates through a network email. And connected to that, Church and Society is also part of the Interfaith Immigration Coalition, and we are working on the Faith for DACA campaign with the IIC and also in partnership with the Home is Here Coalition. So we would love for you to join these efforts, and one of the most direct ways to do that is to let us know that you want us to add you to the Rapid Response Team Network, and we will do that. And all of the things that we do with the Faith for DACA campaign and with Home is Here Coalition, we share through that network. So thank you so much for your time this evening. There is nothing like gathering in sacred spaces with children of God, all of us, to be able to build our knowledge and our resilience to hear these powerful testimonies and stories. I want to give a great big thank you to our panelists tonight, Diana Pliego, Mamadou Diakite, Joella Roberts, and Reverend Carlos. We are so, so grateful for the work that you are doing, the prophetic witness and power that you have offered us tonight. And we pray for our continued efforts so that we come to a time where we see this vision that God has for our communities, where love and justice will rule, and it will protect and honor every single person. So we thank you, and we appreciate you staying late with us. And we hope that you have a wonderful, blessed night.
Yes.